It begins with a man walking alone through the quiet corridors of an American university, hands deep in his pockets, shoulders slightly hunched, as if the weight of the world sat somewhere between his thoughts and his heartbeat. His name is Harold Winfield Hartley, a mathematician whose brilliance was matched only by the number of doors that had quietly closed in his face. He wasn't famous, he wasn't celebrated, and very few people outside his small academic circle could have predicted the role he would later play in rewriting the course of a global war. Long before anyone would call Germany's rise a threat, Hartley had already sensed something shifting in the world's rhythm. Numbers, patterns, and eerie coincidences lined up in ways that bothered him. While others saw normal diplomatic tension, he saw what looked like a developing equation, a formula for something catastrophic. But when he brought his concerns to the very institutions meant to safeguard the nation, they brushed him aside. He was too theoretical, they said, too abstract, too unconventional, a mind better suited for chalkboards than strategy rooms. That sting of rejection stayed with him, like a splinter buried deep beneath the skin. But instead of breaking him, it hardened his resolve. He became obsessed with the one question no one had asked. Can conflict be predicted? And if so, can it be stopped before it ever reaches the battlefield? As the world crept toward the edge of war, Germany's movement seemed deliberate, calculated, and impossible to anticipate. The newspapers described the country's decisions as sudden, bold, almost chaotic. But Hartley didn't see chaos. He saw a pattern no one else had noticed, one that whispered its clues in coded movements, territorial shifts, radio chatter, and diplomatic changes. A pattern so subtle that it lived between the lines of the world's daily events. In those early years, before history gained the clarity of hindsight, his questions made him sound unhinged. People saw a lonely academic working late nights, surrounded by stacks of papers and cryptic hand-drawn charts. They didn't see the connections he was uncovering. They didn't see how every military drill, every economic adjustment, every political speech emerging from Berlin seemed to fit into a larger structure, as if someone behind the scenes were pulling wires with mathematical precision. He tried publishing his research. Journals refused. He tried presenting at conferences. They gave him 5 minutes at the end of a long afternoon when the audience was already gathering their coats. He tried contacting military advisors. He received polite letters thanking him for his interest in national defense. His brilliance went unnoticed, dismissed, stored away in dusty filing cabinets. Yet every rejection only pushed him further into the depths of his obsession. He began constructing something remarkable, not a theory, not a chart, but a machine. Not a machine in the modern sense, but an intricate, almost handmade assembly of rotating discs, sliding rails, and mechanical counters. Something built from old typewriter parts, weather instruments, salvaged telegraph components, and more than a few pieces he engineered from scratch. His workshop looked less like a mathematician's office and more like the inside of a forgotten inventor's attic. He believed that if he could feed the world's data into this mechanical brain, names, dates, supply movements, intercepted messages, political shifts, it could reveal the higher pattern behind Germany's decisions, a rhythm no one else could hear, a rhythm that told the future. Night after night, he wound the machine's springs and let its gears whir and click in the dim light of a single desk lamp. The metal plates shifted like a puzzle reorganizing itself, the discs turning with small clacks that echoed around the room like whispered secrets. Sometimes he would fall asleep at his desk, and the machine would continue its slow calculations beside him, as if keeping watch. At the time, America still believed distance would protect it. Europe's problems were Europe's responsibilities. But Hartley sensed that oceans could no longer serve as shields. He wrote to anyone who would listen, professors, journalists, senators, naval strategists, trying to warn them that Germany's seemingly unpredictable moves were not unpredictable at all. They were part of a sequence, one he could measure. But every time the letters came back with the same quiet dismissal. Thank you for your concern. Your ideas are interesting but impractical. The government already has experts dedicated to this matter. Experts. The same ones who couldn't see what he saw. The same ones who believed Germany's expansion was driven by opportunity, not design. The same ones who thought war, if it came at all, would follow the familiar patterns of the past. Then came the moment that would change everything. The moment Hartley's machine made a prediction so specific, so startlingly precise, that he felt the air leave his lungs. According to his calculations, Germany was preparing a move that would shock the world, a strike aimed not where everyone expected, but where few were even looking. He stared at the machine's final alignment for hours, running the numbers again and again, convinced he had made a mistake. But every calculation led to the same conclusion. Germany was about to flip the board in a way no strategist had considered. For the first time, Hartley felt fear, not the fear of being wrong, but the fear of being right. He gathered every chart, every calculation, every mechanical printout, and prepared a final attempt to warn the military intelligence community. Not through letters this time, not through polite academic channels. He showed up in person at a federal building, exhausted, unshaven, and carrying a wooden crate containing the machine that had consumed his life. Security guards eyed him suspiciously. The receptionist told him, once again, that appointments were required. But something in his voice, some mixture of desperation and conviction, made one official pause. When Hartley opened the crate and revealed the strange, humming device inside, they didn't understand what they were looking at. They only understood the urgency in his trembling hands. He was ushered inside a small meeting room. For the first time, military officials listened. At first, out of curiosity, then with growing unease. Because the deeper Hartley explained, the more their skepticism peeled away. His machine wasn't a toy, his theory wasn't guesswork, and his warnings, they were unnervingly plausible. Here was a man they had rejected, dismissed, ignored, and yet he had built something no one in the government had even thought to attempt. Something capable of assembling scattered fragments of global chaos into a coherent, predictive picture. As the officers leaned forward, brows tense, eyes sharp, one of them finally asked the question that had waited years to be spoken. "Are you telling us we can know Germany's next move before they make it?" Hartley didn't smile. He didn't triumph. He simply nodded. And in that small, dim room, filled with the soft mechanical ticking of his invention, the United States quietly took its first step toward a revolution in intelligence work, one driven not by guesswork, not by instinct, but by the mind of a man the world had rejected, a man who was only beginning to show the power of the machine he had built. The officers who sat across from Hartley that afternoon were trained to hide emotion, but even they couldn't disguise the shift in the room. What started as mild curiosity had turned into something closer to alarm. They asked him to demonstrate the machine, to show how it processed the scattered fragments of information they fed it. Hartley wound the main spring, the gears tightened, and the metal discs began to rotate with a soft, deliberate precision. Each click echoed like a heartbeat. The officials exchanged glances. This wasn't guesswork. This wasn't the rambling of an academic who spent too much time alone. This contraption, strange and homemade as it looked, was revealing a sequence they had never seen before. For every new piece of information they offered, the machine realigned itself and pointed toward the same unsettling conclusion. Germany was preparing something far more strategic than anyone had imagined, and Hartley had found a way to read the signs before they became visible to the rest of the world. After hours of questioning, the officer stepped out of the room. Hartley sat alone with his invention, listening to its faint mechanical murmurs, as if hearing the whispers of a storm growing on the horizon. When the officers returned, they carried a proposal, one that would tear him away from the quiet life he had known. They wanted him to join a classified program housed deep inside a government facility. They wanted to turn his handmade prototype into something larger, faster, more powerful, something capable of processing the overwhelming flood of data pouring in from Europe every hour. For the first time in years, Hartley felt something he barely recognized: validation. But it came with a heavy price. He knew that stepping into their world meant giving up the freedom of working alone. It meant deadlines, secrecy, pressure, and accountability. Most of all, it meant that the machine he built, his machine, would no longer be his alone. It would become the government's property, a national tool, a weapon of prediction. Yet, he agreed. Within weeks, he was moved into a secure research center. The corridors were lined with metal doors, locked filing cabinets, and armed guards. The air smelled of ink, oil, and war. Every day, couriers arrived with batches of intercepted signals, trade records, field reports, and reconnaissance logs. Analysts brought maps dotted with pins, graphs filled with numbers, and notes scribbled by agents who risked their lives overseas. All of it flows straight into Hartley's expanding mechanical system. And the machine grew. New gears were added, new arrays of rotating plates, new logic sequences. Technicians worked side by side with Hartley, often unable to fully grasp what he was building, but trusting that he knew exactly how each part fit into the grand design. At night, when the others went home, he remained in the dim glow of desk lamps, tightening bolts, adjusting cogs, sketching diagrams on yellowing paper. He wasn't just building a machine anymore. He was building a guardian, a sentinel, watching Germany's every move from thousands of miles away. The more data they fed the system, the clearer the patterns became. Hartley discovered something extraordinary. Germany's strategy wasn't driven by pure aggression. It followed a rhythm linked to supply chains, political pressure points, coded communications, and even seemingly unrelated events like railway delays or sudden shifts in foreign markets. To most people, these details meant nothing, but to Hartley, they were threads in a vast tapestry. Once the threads aligned, the machine could predict the next military move like a chess master anticipating an opponent's tactic. Word of Hartley's accuracy spread quietly through the upper ranks of intelligence. What began as skepticism slowly transformed into reliance. When officials needed insight, they asked Hartley before they asked the generals. Not openly, of course his role was far too secret to acknowledge publicly, but behind closed doors, his predictions began shaping defensive strategies, diplomatic decisions, and reconnaissance missions. One of the earliest breakthroughs happened during a cold winter morning, when Germany's troop movements appeared confusing. Reports showed multiple divisions shifting in directions that made no strategic sense. Analysts were baffled. Some believed it was a feint, others believed it was disorganization. But Hartley's machine saw something different, an alignment that pointed toward a coordinated encirclement maneuver. When officials brought maps and questioned him, he calmly traced his finger along a set of projected pathways and said, almost reluctantly, "They're closing a trap, and within 2 weeks, they'll strike here." His voice trembled slightly, not because he doubted his calculations, but because he knew the consequences if he was right. 2 weeks later, Germany launched the exact offensive Hartley had predicted. Military leaders were stunned, some were frightened, and suddenly, his machine was no longer an intriguing experiment, it was a strategic lifeline. Yet despite this growing recognition, Hartley's success came with a strange isolation. He worked constantly, slept irregularly, and lived with the constant pressure of knowing that people far across the ocean were relying on the gears turning in the quiet corners of his lab. Every mistake could mean lives lost. Every correct prediction could prevent disaster. The loneliness he once felt as a rejected mathematician had evolved into a different kind of solitude, the solitude of someone who understood too much. Still, he pressed on. As months passed, Hartley began noticing subtler signs, details so faint that even the machine seemed to hesitate before aligning them. A shift in industrial output, a cryptic adjustment in shipping routes, a sudden surge in coded transmissions. These fragments suggested something massive brewing in Germany. Something unlike anything they had attempted before. But the machine didn't give a clear prediction. It hinted, it whispered, it circled around a conclusion that Hartley couldn't yet grasp. This bothered him deeply. For the first time, the rhythm felt incomplete. He spent days recalibrating the system, adjusting its mechanical logic, adding new layers of analysis. He asked for more data, trade ledgers, resource allocations, even newspaper clippings from European cities. Nothing seemed insignificant to him anymore. Everything mattered. One night, long after the rest of the facility had gone silent, Hartley sat alone, surrounded by stacks of documents and glowing lamps, staring at the machine as it clicked gently. He felt an uncomfortable truth rising inside him. Whatever Germany was preparing, it was bigger than any single operation. It was a turning point, something that could shift the balance of the entire war. And the machine was struggling because the pattern wasn't complete yet. There were still missing pieces. In one of those long, tense sessions, a young intelligence officer hurried into the room carrying newly intercepted radio traffic. The signals were short, coded, and confusing. Most analysts had dismissed them as routine, but when Hartley fed the sequences into his machine, something extraordinary happened. The gears spun with unusual speed, the metal plates locking into place with sharp clicks. Hartley leaned forward, eyes narrowing. The machine was no longer hesitant. The pattern finally made sense. Every gear, every plate, every counter aligned to a single, chilling projection. Germany was preparing a massive strategic pivot, one that would change the course of the war if it succeeded. Hartley swallowed hard. The officers watching him could see the color drain from his face. "What is it?" one of them asked. Hartley didn't answer immediately. He stared at the machine as if hoping it would contradict its own conclusion. But it didn't. The prediction remained firm, unflinching. For months, the government had relied on Hartley's mind and his invention. Now, for the first time, they waited in silence, sensing the gravity in his expression. Finally, he spoke softly, almost as if confessing a secret he wished he didn't know. And what he revealed next would send shock waves through the highest levels of American intelligence. It would force military leaders to rethink everything they believed about Germany's intentions. It would push Hartley into the center of a crisis greater than anything he had ever imagined. Because his machine wasn't just predicting a battle. It was predicting a turning point that could decide the fate of nations. The officers waited as Hartley steadied himself, his fingertips resting lightly on the machine he had built from old typewriter parts and sleepless nights. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but unmistakably certain. According to the machine, Germany wasn't merely preparing another offensive. They were about to shift the entire direction of the war toward a target no one believed they would dare to challenge. The projection pointed to an operation so bold, so geographically ambitious, that the room fell into stunned silence. Maps were pulled onto the table. Documents were spread like cards in a gambler's final hand. The officers demanded details, timing, troop estimations. Hartley answered each question with a mixture of reluctance and conviction, as if every word added weight to a truth he wished weren't real. Once the shock faded, the questions turned sharper. Could the prediction be wrong? Could the machine be misaligned? Could the intercepted data be misleading? Hartley's hands trembled slightly as he checked the alignment again. The gears clicked, the plates slid, and once again, the pattern pointed to the same outcome. Germany was preparing to overturn the strategic board in a single breathtaking move. When the officers took his findings to the top levels of command, the reactions were mixed. Some believed Hartley immediately. Others dismissed the idea as impossible, too dangerous, too unpredictable, too contrary to everything the generals had learned through traditional intelligence. But the more they examined the supporting data, the harder it became to ignore the signs. Steps that seemed unrelated suddenly formed a clear path when viewed through Hartley's lens. In the following days, tension in the facility grew thick enough to fill in the air. Meetings went late into the night, telephones rang endlessly, couriers rushed in and out with sealed folders clutched against their chests. And at the center of it all was a man who, only a year earlier, had been turned away by the very institutions now depending on him. Hartley's life became a blur of briefings, recalibrations, and last-minute confirmations. Every hour brought new intelligence that had to be fed into the machine. Every change reshaped the prediction slightly but never contradicted it. The momentum of Germany's plan was unmistakable now. The world simply hadn't realized what was coming. When the attack finally began, exactly where and when Hartley's machine had predicted the shock around the world was immediate. Newspapers called it astonishing. Commanders called it devastating. But inside that hidden government facility, the mood was eerily calm. They had prepared not perfectly, not with absolute certainty, but with enough warning to blunt the blow, enough to slow the enemy's advance, enough to save lives. In the days that followed, American and Allied forces scrambled to adapt. Military leaders who once doubted Hartley now sought him out before launching any major response. His machine became an essential piece of the war effort, a silent engine humming in the shadows, turning scattered fragments of chaos into insight. But the prediction that changed everything came not from the machine, but from Hartley himself. Late one night, after the facility had gone quiet, he sat alone beside the whirring gears, exhausted yet unable to sleep. He watched the rotating plates reflect the lamplight and realized that the machine was no longer just helping them understand the war, it was changing how they fought it. Victory might depend as much on foresight as on firepower. And if that was true, the future of conflict would never look the same again. He knew he had opened a door that could never be closed. When the war finally began turning toward the Allies, quietly influenced by predictions that were never publicly acknowledged, Hartley felt a strange blend of pride and unease. His invention had saved lives, perhaps change the course of history itself. Yet he couldn't escape the question that had followed him from the very beginning. Should anyone have the power to predict the future of nations? That question deepened when the war ended. The government offered him a position of influence, a chance to build even more advanced predictive systems. But Hartley declined. He didn't want to spend his life surrounded by locked doors and guarded corridors. He didn't want his legacy to be a machine used solely for war. Instead, he retreated to a quiet town, living simply, anonymously, far from the world of strategy rooms and classified documents. His machine, once dismissed as the odd creation of an eccentric mathematician, was dismantled, studied, and reborn in forms the public would never know existed. Its designs shaped methods that would influence intelligence analysis for generations, though Hartley's name rarely appeared in the official accounts. His contribution lived in the shadows, whispered about by analysts and strategists who understood how close the world had come to being caught off guard. And what of Hartley himself? Some say he continued working quietly in his home workshop, sketching ideas that never needed to be seen by officials or soldiers. Others believe he abandoned mathematics altogether, choosing to live the life that had been denied to him for so many years. But a few who visited him in his later years spoke of a man who never lost his curiosity, a man who kept a small wooden box on his desk containing a single gear from the original machine, the machine that had once predicted the future. He never spoke of it. He simply kept it nearby, as if it were a reminder of the moment when a rejected mathematician helped steer the world away from catastrophe. History rarely remembers the quiet figures working behind closed doors. It celebrates the generals, the politicians, the public heroes, the ones who stood at podiums and commanded armies. But every so often, hidden deep in the machinery of conflict, there is someone whose brilliance changes everything without ever stepping onto a battlefield. Harold Winfield Hartley was one of those people. A man the world dismissed. A man the government almost ignored. A man who built a machine powerful enough to reveal the enemy's hand before the cards were ever played. And though his name may not appear in the grand monuments or the sweeping textbooks, the echo of his work lives on in every calculated strategy, in every quiet prediction, in every moment when nations prepare for dangers they cannot yet see. He proved that sometimes the difference between disaster and survival rests not in the strength of armies, but in the mind of someone who refuses to give up on the truth they alone can see. A truth hidden in patterns. A truth whispered in numbers. A truth only one man believed in until the world had no choice but to believe it too.